Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'm Sergeant Kevin Allen with the Portland Police Bureau, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this announcement for the successful completion of the Active Bystander for Law Enforcement training here at PPB. We'll start with some remarks from Assistant Chief Jamie Resch, and she will introduce our guests for their remarks. And afterward, I'll open it up to some questions from all of you. A reminder that please make sure your microphones are muted so everyone can get clean audio. AC Resch, welcome, and would you please give everyone who isn't familiar with ABLE a brief introduction to the program and how it got started here at PPB?
Yeah, absolutely. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this event. It's actually a really good positive thing that the Bureau has done. So my name is Jamie Resch, and I'm the Assistant Chief of Investigations for the Portland Police Bureau. And I'm happy to be here today to talk about the ABLE training that we just completed, or Active Bystandership for law enforcement. With me today to talk about the program are my fellow facilitators, Sergeant Todd Tackett, you wave there, Todd, Officer Rayana Carriage, also on the screen, and Officer Jackson Oldham. In addition to all sworn members who have been trained in ABLE, we did provide a training to community members from several of our advisory groups and PSEP. And Ms. Layla Hajou and Mr. Jim Khan, who participated in this training, are also here to speak today about their experiences and provide their thoughts on the ABLE program. Also joining us today is Mr. Brett Parsons from the National ABLE program, who observed one of the trainings that we provided, and he's going to provide his thoughts on PPB's implementation of the training. So a little bit of history. PPB began the process of becoming an ABLE agency back in 2019. You actually have to apply and be accepted. After we were approved to be an ABLE agency, the 4 facilitators today attended a Train the Trainer program that was held by the National ABLE program. In mid-October of last year, we began teaching every sworn PPB member from the chief all the way down to our newest officer, and we completed that training in mid-December. Moving forward, all new officers will receive ABLE training as part of their advanced academy. So I think when we first announced to the Bureau that we would be doing ABLE training, a lot of members didn't know what to expect. But each day we received positive feedback about the training, and members appreciated the harm prevention and early intervention concepts that the ABLE program provides. So for those of you who are not familiar with ABLE, it is a national program on active bystandership and intervention for law enforcement, training specifically on when and how to intervene. The philosophy of ABLE is harm prevention by early intervention. It's about preventing harm to the community, to the officers, and to our profession. It requires a culture that supports and expects active bystandership, and it works best when it's developed from the bottom up and also from the top down. It works best inside out, helping the community understand active bystandership, and outside in, actively listening to the community as we develop our program and change our culture. It requires the integrity to tell someone what they need to hear instead of what they want to hear, the courage to say and do things that are sometimes hard and or scary, the dependability to always do the right thing and have others' best interest at heart, as well as the ability to have difficult conversations with a colleague when it may be necessary. So in addition to the original 8-hour training that all of our members received, the Bureau will be working with the national program to continue trainings throughout our upcoming in-services. ABLE focuses on 3 pillars, also all of which are highlighted in our ABLE policy. The 3 pillars are to reduce mistakes, the need to intervene. Members should strive to be self-aware and mindful of others in an effort to recognize the need for intervention. The second pillar is to prevent misconduct, the duty to intervene. Members have a duty to intervene to prevent or stop another member from conduct that the intervening member knows or reasonably should know is a violation of law or policy unless it is unsafe to do so. And also to promote officer wellness, the third pillar. Wellness plays a critical role in our members' ability to perform their duties at an optimal level. So I just wanted to kind of give you a really brief introduction into what the ABLE program is and kind of how we got started. But I think it's really important that you hear from 2 of our community members who went through one of our trainings, and they can share with you how they think the Bureau is doing in implementing this program, and then also let Mr. Parsons explain how he thinks from the national side the Bureau is doing in implementing this program. And I'll be happy to answer any questions after everybody gets an opportunity to speak. So Layla, I believe that you were going to start.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Yes, the importance of ABLE is with addressing police misconduct immediately when it occurs through real-time mandated intervention. This removes the militaristic rank protocol, allowing and requiring intervention no matter the rank level of the officer. This also changes the accountability of the police officer to not just address oneself, but also be accountable for others involved. Already the community is holding PPB accountable for the misconduct of one officer. It just makes sense that having ABLE in place will make a positive difference with getting officers involved when injustice occurs and not stand aside due to rank level protocols. I am sure there will be updates of this process as this is new, and that should be expected with new changes, but it is also a good start. With the promise of better community awareness, PPB has been engaged with community outreach, especially with volunteer community-based advisory groups that work with PPB. The Coalition of Advisory Groups, or otherwise known as CAG, represents marginalized community groups that meet monthly with PPB to focus on issues that impact community safety and well-being and be a part of the review process of new initiatives. Our focus is to change PPB's culture to promote community trust through transparency and accountability, and it starts with training and programs like ABLE. We also had the recent opportunity to participate with community PPB's academy training to give us a much better understanding of the operation of the police officer. Again, more information, transparency on what goes on provides community with better understanding and knowing what to address and how to measure its success and also improvements. It is easy to point out issues. It is another thing when trying to be a part of the solution. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague from CAG, Jim Kahn. Jim, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm off mute. I'm a member of the Training Advisory Council, which is how I served with Layla on CAG. And I was present with 5 of my colleagues to watch this particular training. So while I'm speaking for myself, I'm also making reference to the joint statement that all of us put together, which is a public document, which is available on the PPB website, which was approved by the TAC as a whole after we did it. And you guys are always familiar with doing searches of the PPB website more so than I am, so you can find it up there. It came out on November 14th. I am, or was, still am, a policy wonk. So the first thing I'm interested in is I saw a very promising course here that was excellently delivered, and the objectives were really solid. But the question is, how will we know whether or not it makes a difference? There are a couple of ways about how we won't know. If there are more reports of officers reporting other officers did poorly, that's not a measure of success. That's just a measure of more reports. If there are actually fewer reports, that might be success because the interventions focus on getting it done as early as possible, which means that some things won't happen because somebody intervened before a stage when it had to be reported according to recently passed House Bill 2929, which says that the Oregon officers are required to report behavior that's out of policy. So how do we measure it? Outcomes won't suffice. How we measure it, in addition to looking at outcomes, is we have to look at whether the processes to make it work are in place and whether the structure to make it work are in place. And both of those are really promising. When we saw the dry run, I asked AC Resch whether or not the Portland Police Protective Association, PPA, was on board. And she blew me away when she said, yes, that is one of the most positive things I've heard in a long time, that the union understands that it's in their interest to behave in a responsible way and that they're for getting training so that they know how to do it better. The other thing is the process. Are the processes in place? And the answer is, yes, some of those processes are in place. That we had an assistant chief leading the course is one way of saying leadership is involved. That we're bringing it from the bottom up with the union support is another way. And that we're getting these renewals and we're constantly refreshing is another way. So all of this is following what policy evaluators would say is the right way to find out whether or not a policy is going to work. And PPB is checking all of the boxes with this particular course. And that's particularly promising to me. A major success for this would be if officers realized that when you're wearing the uniform, you're no longer yourself. You're a representative of the organization that wearing that uniform tells you you are. And you're also a representative of the community that organization serves. And that's a very important point, and that came up often in the ABLE statement. But they never beat you over the head with it. It was sort of implied. It was really beautifully done. So I am very, very pleased about that. My own way of putting it is that because I had some experience in England, is friends don't let friends scrump apples. I don't know if you know what scrumping means. It means basically stealing apples. And if that becomes part of what the police culture is about, that friends don't let friends scrump apples, that will be a great big success. One of the things that really makes it work is the ability to connect things that are local. In the one we saw, there's part of the national show that shows Mo Cheeks. You guys know who he is more than I do because I only arrived in Portland in 2006. Helping a woman who was having a difficult time delivering the Star-Spangled Banner at a Trailblazer game. And that was a beautiful little example of solidarity, not putting a person down, giving them the support they needed, and letting her get on and actually do it so that later in her life, she won't be freaked out by what happened and stop. One of the comments that the TAC made is it would have been nice to really directly connect that to an earlier scenario. There was a junior female officer who was directly intervening, and there was a senior officer who was not being particularly nice to her. And it would have been nice if in that scenario, intervention had happened earlier, and you could connect the nature of that intervention to the kind of thing that Mo Cheeks so beautifully did at the basketball game. So we think in summary, we at the TAC think this is really promising, and we think this could be a great big game changer for PPB, and we look forward to seeing it grow. Thank you.
I think that leaves it to me, right, Jamie?
Yeah, I was going to say thank you, Jim and Brett. I think that that is you are next.
Absolutely. Well, first, I am coming to you from Washington, D.C. Please don't hold that against me. My name is Brett Parson, and I represent the Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement project, which is run out of the Georgetown University Law Center. I want to start with just not part of my prepared remarks, but just to tell you how warm my heart is right now, because at its core, what ABLE is about bringing community, police officers, and police agencies together. And what you've just heard from Jamie and from Layla and from Jim is that there has already been some success in that in Portland, and I have no doubt that that's going to continue. Not just because of ABLE, because of a lot of things that the Portland Police Bureau is doing, but we'd like to believe that the Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement project is part of that culture change. And I just want to highlight a couple of things before I share with you some numbers, and then I share with you my observations, because as Jamie mentioned, I actually had the pleasure to observe these outstanding instructors, Jamie, Jackson, Ray, and Todd, as they taught one of the classes in Portland. So let me just share with you, when we talk about culture change within a police department and the culture change that we believe ABLE can be a part of, and that, quite frankly, all of us within the profession and those of you looking from the outside into our profession want and deserve. We're talking about changing two main words and the meaning of that to us as police officers. I should have mentioned, I'm a police officer myself. I've been in the business for over 30 years here on the East Coast. And all of my peers, all nearly 800,000 of them, we know what people mean when they use the word courage and when they use the word loyalty. And we also know what people think we think that word means. And what ABLE is about is changing and expanding the definitions of those words to include having the courage to confront one's peer, one's coworker, a fellow police officer, whether that is someone of the same rank and same seniority, or someone who has more time on than you or is much higher in rank than you. But that if you see harm in one way or another, whether that's through misconduct, through its mistakes, or through their health and wellness, that you have the courage to step up and to intervene or to find someone else who can, and we teach those tactics. And the other word that we seek to expand the definition of is the word loyalty. There are a lot of people that look at law enforcement and they think that there is this, camaraderie that we will never, ever break. And we know within law enforcement that good cops, the cops that you want in your communities, we don't want cops making mistakes. We don't want bad cops doing things that amount to misconduct or even criminal acts. And we certainly don't want to lose our peers due to health and wellness issues, or to have them make mistakes or something that amounts to misconduct because their health and wellness leads to that. So we want them to be loyal to each other and loyal to the profession, which leads to being loyal to our communities and our profession. I wanted to share that with you because I've seen that personally in the instruction that I saw in the Portland Police Bureau. Let me just share a little bit of statistics for you to let you know kind of where Portland is in the entire ABLE movement throughout the United States and actually Canada right now. We started just over a year ago with the Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement project. That doesn't mean this concept is new. In fact, it is not. We use research and tactics and techniques that have been part of research going back over 50 plus years, going back to actually World War II. And we use research and tried and true tactics that have been used in industries like the medical field, like the university campuses to combat sexual abuse on university campuses, and in the airline industry. It's been used in the military. So we know that active bystandership works. And so that's why we were confident that when we created this curriculum, that it would work within law enforcement. And we're seeing those results now. But in that short time of just over a year, we are now at 209 agencies. We're approaching 216 that several are about to sign on to be ABLE agencies themselves. So we'll have 216 agencies very shortly. We are in 42 states and a couple of provinces up there in Canada. We have trained in excess of 121,000 police officers around the United States. And actually, let me restate that. We are in, like I said, about 216 agencies. Those agencies have about 121 plus thousand officers in them. They are in various stages of completing their training. So when each of them hit that milestone that we're so proud that Portland has hit at this point, which is training their entire current active duty members, we will exceed well over 120,000 trained officers. Now, let's translate that into the human beings that they touch. Based upon our research, those agencies are serving close to 75 million people around the United States. So this concept of ABLE is touching people throughout the United States, and it's growing each and every day. We have done 52 train the trainers. The model that we use here is that the national staff like me, we don't come in and teach in Portland or Miami or New York City. We train your officers, your officials, the people who know your jurisdiction, and then we have them deliver that curriculum back there. And we've trained over 1,300 members of law enforcement to teach this throughout those 216 agencies around the country. And then finally, We have done 52 trainer sessions. Do the math. That means we've been doing just about one a week for the last year, and we continue to run these train the trainers. In fact, we're running one right now this week for another nearly 30 officers who will go out and train at their agency. And then finally, I wanted to share with you my observations. I am lucky enough in the work that I do through ABLE to see instructors all over the country, from New York City down to Orlando, Florida, as far west as Portland, Oregon. And I can tell you that it was obvious to me how much preparation that the four individuals that I saw teach, the four people that are on your screen today, how much preparation they put into this. And they, as a team, did exactly what we expect at ABLE. They engaged the officers, sometimes in very difficult discussions, sometimes waiting for that pause, that silence to let them think and then come up with what their thoughts were. But most importantly, they walked them through not only this is what you need to do, but why it works, how it works, and the tactics and strategies that they can employ to make it work. So I'll finish with that and just tell you that we at ABLE are so proud to be partnered with the Portland Police Bureau. We expect even more training to occur, obviously, because this is not a one-time shot, and the folks in Portland know that. They will be doing continued in-service training, as Jamie mentioned, for their members, and obviously their new officers that come in will be trained in this as well. And we at ABLE will be partnering with them hand in hand to help them as they continue to roll this out. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing more success in Portland.
All right. Thank you, Brett, and thank you, everybody, for your comments very much. They were very well received, and we really appreciate it. Now we do have some time for some questions, and the part of this, I think everybody has done this before with regard to raising hands. So we'll be asking you to raise your hand in Zoom, depending on which type of interface you're using. It may be in a different place. So if you have any trouble, let me know, but we'll be able to call on you in order, and make sure you specify which speaker your question is for, and ask your question, and then please, again, mute your microphone so everyone can hear your responses. If anybody has issues raising hands, I am monitoring the chat, so you can also let me know in there that you have a question. So we'll get started now, and Jonathan Levinson is first up. So Jonathan, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Thanks, Sergeant Allen. This is Jonathan Levinson from OKB. And this question is for, I guess, any of the officers on the call who participated in protest response in 2020. A federal judge and the DOJ have said that officers violated Bureau directives during those protests. After having this training, looking back, can any of you identify points where you think that you should have spoken up or intervened in any of the uses of force that violated Bureau directives?
So, Jonathan, I think the point of today's example of ABLE program is to tell you what we've done. I don't feel that it is appropriate to ask the officers at this point that question. If that is the case and they felt that they needed to do that, that would be directed immediately to either IPR or to internal affairs. What I can tell you is that this training is designed so that moving forward, we hope that we were able to intervene much earlier in situations where things don't have to be reported. That's kind of one of the pillars of ABLE is early intervention. So what we're hoping is that as the Bureau moves forward, officers feel more comfortable in doing those interventions. But unless one of the officers would like to give a specific example of when you did intervene, because there were a lot of examples given during our training, specifically related to events of 2020, where officers did do interventions, something as simple as watching an officer get frustrated and stepping in front and taking over their role or something like that. There were lots of good examples that were given.
Hey, Jamie, if I could also add just from a more general ABLE perspective for you, Jonathan, and for the rest of you on the call, we hear from officers all the time after they've gone through this training. Where has this training been my entire career? Man, I wish I had this. They also, as part of the instruction that we do, they go through a block of instruction where they're asked to recall moments in their career and their lives where they did intervene and where they fail to intervene. And so there is that reflection that occurs within the training. And there's a lot of great discussion that we've heard occur throughout agencies around the country.
One of my other questions was going to be if any of the officers can share examples of when they have spoken up or intervened. So Chief Fresh, if anyone feels comfortable sharing that would be great.
This is Todd Tackett. I'm a sergeant out at the training division. And I think to your question, there was an incident about halfway through our training of all the members of the police bureau where a sergeant had called me and said, hey, I wanted to kind of tell you about an able moment that happened. And we had entitled it, like, call it an able moment. That's just what they, named it during this. And their, example was an officer was interacting with a community member, and the sergeant was there and could see, the topic that was being discussed was upsetting to the officer. And the sergeant discreetly called the officer back over, kind of got an explanation of what was going on for this investigation. And the officer's like, okay, I'm going to go back and continue. And the sergeant, I think discreetly, or, so the officer wasn't obviously aware, was like, actually, why don't you go, and gave him another assignment instead of going back to that individual, because there was another officer there that could step in and continue that discussion with the person that was the target of the investigation. And after everything had concluded, the officers and that sergeant came together and said, they were kind of debriefing what had happened, not just that incident, but the overall. And the officer that ended up being reassigned during that spoke up and said, hey, without even being prompted, said that was kind of an able moment. Like, I didn't recognize it until kind of looking back in the discussion with that group. And so I go back to, not without sharing the specifics of the incident, but knowing that this training is having an impact. And like I said, about a month in to our training, someone coming back and saying, hey, we had an able moment. And not only that, but the officer that was intervened upon, recognizing that happened and wasn't upset, was actually like, oh, that's great. I'm glad that happened. And so, not answering your question directly, but I do know that, it was impactful, and we had some members share their experiences.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sergeant Tackett. Anybody else want to jump in on that question before we move on? Okay, up next is Maxine Bernstein. Go ahead, Max.
Thank you, Kevin. I had hoped to sit in on the training to really experience how it is presented to officers, but was not allowed. And so if you can explain how the training is presented to give us a real picture of whether it's through scenarios or lectures, and also how 8 hours of training is expected to change the culture of a department.
Jamie, you want to take that first? You want me to go from the ABLE perspective?
Yeah, I'll take it. And Brett, you can add to anything if you recall it, if I miss a piece. And Todd, Ray, or Jackson, feel free to jump in as well if I miss something. So it is an 8-hour training program. And Max, the point isn't that 8 hours is going to completely change a culture. It's one step towards that. And that is why there's going to be additional training in our upcoming in-services. That's part of the agreement with ABLE, is that it's not a one and done thing, because we realize that it's going to take practice. And we did get some feedback from officers on additional things they wish to see in future trainings. But the day is broken up. It was into different sections. So it starts kind of with the philosophy behind ABLE. It works into kind of the social science behind ABLE. We illustrate some examples of ABLE, like videos and those kinds of things. It goes into discussing actual human behavior, because this is based on human behavior, not just something that police officers do, but all humans. So we highlight that as well. And then in the afternoon, it transitions to scenarios where the officers are given different roles that they play. They either play the person who receives the intervention or the person who gives the intervention. And all of the officers, all of the members went through multiple role plays where they practice this. In addition to this, our training division is looking for ways to include the ABLE principles into our future trainings and into our future role plays and scenarios. So it's interwoven into all of our training. But again, this is just the first step towards that culture change. But what I'm happy about is how well it was received and how appreciative of the training that the officers were. We got a lot of positive feedback. And Jim, I see that your hand is up. So I think it would be great. You and Layla both saw it. If you would like to kind of provide some perspective to Max's question.
Yeah, the short answer to your really cogent question, Maxine, is all of the above. It all really happened, and it was all very, very well presented. I think what is even more important than that is that the thinking that I've observed since then is in the direction of able moments, if you wish. You may know that over the weekend there was an incident in Sunrise, Florida, in which a junior officer pulled away a sergeant who was behaving inappropriately. And I don't know, Brett, whether or not that particular force has had able yet, but she certainly behaved in an able way and got the full support of the leadership of that organization. And then when I talked with Assistant Chief Resch about this, I said, how would that have gone down with you over here? Her immediate reaction was, we're going to add to our future training how we can be more proactive, how we can act more quickly, because this one officer did something, and when the sergeant went for her throat, everybody else was probably in a state of shock, so that they didn't intervene. But if they're better trained, they're not going to let that officer who's acting out of policy go for the throat of the person who is actively intervening. So this means it's becoming part of the way they think about how they train. It's a part of the way they think about how they can make it even better than what they're doing now.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, what's really attractive about this is the empowerment. You know, you are empowering officers of all levels to take an action for the benefit of righting a wrong. And like I said, I think, the protocol has been more of a militaristic, that if you're not of a certain rank and you're addressing somebody who's above your rank, you're not entitled to step in and intervene. And this takes care of that. This eliminates that and becomes more of accountability for everybody to have each other's back as officers to make sure that the reputation of the Portland Police Bureau is being upheld. So it's going to be the proof in the pudding. This is new, but this is so promising in so many different levels. So I just want to add that little bit.
Can I ask, Brett, is this training provided at all to basic academy, like recruits who are just starting out as officers anywhere?
So that is a requirement when an agency is accepted into the ABLE project, that the agency agrees that they will train from top to bottom current officers and every officer that comes on the department thereafter. So recruits are in fact trained in the exact same curriculum. Obviously, because they don't have as much experience as veteran officers, you're going to perhaps use different scenarios and case studies, but absolutely new officers are trained that way. And I believe, Jamie, you're doing that there in Portland, right?
Yeah, so it's Max, to answer your question, in Portland or in Oregon, it's set up a little bit different than other places where all of our new hires go to the state basic academy. They get their training there, and then they come to Portland and we do an advanced academy. So during our advanced academy is when they are getting the ABLE training. Brett, correct me if I'm wrong, though, the state of Washington is requiring this for all of their law enforcement officers. So it may be taught at their state basic, but I do not know that for sure.
That is correct. The state of Washington has mandated it statewide. The state of New Jersey has also done so, and we have other states considering that as well.
And to add, my support of it, I would be fully supportive of the officers getting this at the basic academy, and then we could build upon it at advanced academy. But right now, since not all agencies around are able agencies, we teach it at the advanced academy.
All right, very good. Thanks for all your answers on that. And Max, thank you for the question. I don't see any other questions holding, but we have time for one more if anybody else has anything before we wrap up.
Yeah, my name is Nate. I'm with K2. I'm wondering if you can go into more detail about the kind of scenarios that were covered in training about when interventions would be required, and kind of what they went over. So any of the trainers or participants in the training could talk about that.
Yeah, Jackson or Ray, do you want to give some examples of a couple of the role plays that we did?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, so a couple of the role plays that we go through, there's 4 of them in total that we use. The first is a health and wellness scenario. So we're 2 officers working together. One has noticed that the other has started to kind of show those signs that maybe they're under a lot of stress, or maybe there's something in their personal life that's starting to go wrong. And so it's having that other officer intervene and start trying to ask those questions, and then offer resources like our employee assistance program, or just somewhere that officer can go and try to get address those health and wellness issues. The second scenario is based in a protest, where officers are at the edge of a public park or public square, and one of the officers is getting berated and name called. And the other officer sees the frustration and sees that it's starting to get under that officer's skin. And so they have to step in and diffuse that frustration, and again, come up with some kind of solution to that, whether that means asking a sergeant to be rotated, off that position for a moment, going to get a drink of water, something like that. Another scenario is an officer, a training officer with their recruit officer. That training officer parks their police vehicle blocking a street while they're on a non-emergency call, where parking down the block in a parking space would be appropriate. And that recruit officer has to bring this up, that, hey, we're blocking a street. There's people that need to get by. This isn't a high priority call. Maybe we can, do that community policing aspect and park where we're not blocking the street. And then finally, the fourth scenario has an officer intervening on a sergeant's behavior, where that sergeant is interacting with a houseless member of our community, and is frustrated and is starting to throw some things around and berate this person. And that officer has to, again, step in and remove that sergeant from the situation, maybe find something else for them to do, kind of de-escalate in that situation. So those are the 4 scenarios that we have the officers go through.
Quick follow-up. Were any of the scenarios, do they involve any sort of physical intervention, like the Florida example that was referenced earlier? Is that something that's part of the training?
Yeah, so we do talk about that, that in some situations, that may be what has to happen. And in a couple of the videos that we show of examples of interventions that have occurred, it is a physical intervention. Where if you can step in verbally, that's great. But maybe if the harm is imminently happening, what needs to happen is a hand on the shoulder and you step somebody back. So that is an option that we discussed.
A lot of the scenarios and stuff are meant to illustrate a lot of times what we think are barriers to interventions, whether or not it's time on the bureau, like based on seniority or rank. And so that's why those are set up that way, where you have, a trainee who has to intervene on a coach, an officer that has to intervene on a sergeant or something like that. One of the things that we stress throughout the training is that interventions should not be affected by your time on the bureau or your rank, that everybody should feel comfortable and confident in stepping in, and those who have those interventions done on them should appreciate when it happens. So one of the things that we ask for at the end of this is, if you are a supervisor, go back to your shift and tell the members that you supervise, it is okay if you see me doing something that is going to lead to any type of harm, that you intervene on me. I will appreciate it, to try to limit that hesitancy that anybody may have. Same thing if you are an FTO and you have a trainee, we want those conversations to start happening.
right, great questions and great answers. Is there anybody else that wants to say anything before we wrap up? All right, seeing none, I want to thank all of our speakers, our trainers, and all of you members of the media who joined us today. A reminder that we will be putting this up later on our YouTube page as well, so people can see the entire presentation. And also, if you are developing any other questions over the course of your reporting, don't forget to email us at ppbpio@portlandoregon.gov. And we'll be happy to get you an answer to your question. With that, we'll thank you again and enjoy your afternoon.